Welcome back, everyone. Today we're gonna be making an over-the-helmet balaclava. And I've had a lot of requests for this, so I wanted to go back, redesign the pattern, make it big enough to fit over any helmet. And it's also just a nice big design for a cozy fit without a helmet. This sewing project is on the easier side, so if you are new to sewing, you should have no problem following the easy step-by-step tutorial. With all that being said, grab that printable pattern and let's get started. Getting started with supplies, you'll need 1 yard for your main fabric, and I recommend grabbing a fleece, chirpa, or a sweatshirt fleece. All these fabrics are easy to work with, and they're gonna produce a really warm balaclava. But like always, get creative with it and use whatever fabric you think is gonna bring out that design. You'll need 1 to 2 yards of cord, and this is gonna be for the hood drawstring. I'm gonna be using a paracord because I find it's really strong, and you can get these in a lot of different colors. You'll need 1 yard of elastic cord, and this is gonna be for the inside neck gaiter. I like using elastic cord here because you can really cinch it shut and it's going to stay in that spot, but feel free just to use regular cord, or this is optional and you don't have to add it at all. Going along with the cord and the elastic cord, you'll need 3 cord stoppers, 2 for the hood and 1 for the neck warmer. And you can use any style you want. You can use the 2-hole or the 1-hole, and you can buy these in a kit that include all the different types. You'll need 4 eyelets, and you can pretty much use whatever size eyelet you want. This is going to be for the hood and also the neck warmer. Lastly, you'll need your pattern. This pattern is available at properfitclothing.com. It's super easy to use. All you have to do is print it off, tape it together, cut it out, and you're ready to go. Do is to cut out the top and one of the side edges. This is going to allow you to overlap the pages for a perfectly aligned pattern. And once you have all your supplies gathered and your pattern printed out, it's time to move into cutting. And after taping the pattern together, it should look like this. Be sure to check your printer alignment for the best possible results. The middle hood panel can be taped together separately because no other panels are intersecting on the same page. And from here, we're going to cut on the outside of the black line. With all of the panels cut, you should end up with 1 shoulder panel cut on the fold. And it's very crucial you cut on the fold because it's going to make the panel symmetrical. 1 face panel cut out of your main fabric on the fold. 1 middle hood panel cut out of your main fabric on the fold. And lastly, 2 hood panels cut out of your main fabric. Before we jump into assembly, I want to first go over how you can adjust this pattern. To start with, this pattern is big enough to go over any helmet. But if you'd like to change the side to make it smaller or even bigger, it's very easy to do. For the hood panel, you could add or subtract to the height by adjusting the bottom edge. You don't necessarily have to adjust the overall curve at the top back edge. Adjusting the bottom edge will make the most difference. If you do make any adjustments to the hood panel, you're going to have to also adjust the middle hood panel, because adjusting the height of the hood panel is going to change the length of that back edge. So essentially all you had to do is remeasure that back edge on the hood panel and adjust it to your middle hood panel. Moving on to the shoulder panel, this one too, you can adjust the height very easily. And essentially this is going to help adjust how much falls on your shoulder. If you adjust the overall width of the shoulder panel, then you're going to have to adjust the same width to the face panel. Face panel is another one that you can customize to your exact measurements because when you fold it in half, that's actually going to be the height of the neck panel on the inside. So if you end up playing around with this adjustment, just make sure you fold it in half so you get the actual adjustment size of the finished face panel. But like I said before, I guarantee this will fit over any ski helmet, so if that's what you're going for, there's no need to make adjustments. Moving on to assembly, we're going to start with the face panel. The first thing we're going to do is locate the eyelet placement guide. We want to mark this placement onto our fabric, and the easiest way to do this is to actually cut out that placement guide on the pattern. Once the guide is cut out, we're going to open up the fabric so the right side is facing up. Chalk out the eyelet placement guide on the left, flip it over, and chalk it out on the right. Keep in mind we're going to be folding this panel in half, so we want the eyelet placement guide under that center fold guide. It's best to test this by folding the panel in half, checking where your eyelet placement guides fall, and to make sure they're under that center fold guide. If everything checks out, unfold the panel so the right side is facing up. Using a hole punch or scissors, cut the eyelet placement guides to the sides of your eyelets. I'll be using a smaller eyelet, and the reason I chose to use these smaller ones is because they come with the plastic washer. This washer is going to help stabilize the eyelet on the stretchy fleece fabric. And all you have to do is slide it onto the back of the main part of the eyelet, and then you're going to have one on the opposite side of the fabric on the back end of the eyelet. These together will create a nice foundation on that stretchy fabric so the eyelet doesn't rip out. Feed the main part of the eyelet in from the right side and the back end from the wrong side of the fabric. And I'll be installing these eyelets with a very basic technique. It's a hammer die. You can use a hammer die or a die press. This came with the kit, so I'm just going to use it. It's very easy to use and it works really good. Put the right side of the eyelet into the base of the die. Insert the rod from the right side and hammer it down firmly. And you want a nice good firm hammer to really secure these 2 pieces together. And by design, you can stretch this fabric and the eyelet is not going to come shooting out because that plastic really reinforces it and creates a nice foundation. An alternative to the washers is interfacing, and pretty much you can use any weight interfacing because what you're trying to do is to get the fabric not to stretch in that area. So you cut a small piece, apply it in the eyelet guide area, and lastly add your eyelet through the interfacing. This will prevent overstretching and that eyelet popping out. Both methods work great. I like using the washers because it speeds up production time. Open the panel back up and we're going to add an eyelet to the other eyelet placement guide. Just repeat the steps. Add the eyelet from the right side, add the backing on the wrong side, and hammer it into position. After installing the second eyelet, lay the panel out flat with right sides facing up. And I just want to quickly remind you, you can use any size eyelet and you can actually place these anywhere on that top edge as long as it's below that halfway middle point. So no worries if you have a bigger eyelet. If it's really close to that top edge, that's totally fine. You just need it to be on the right side when you fold that panel in half. Moving on, we're going to fold this panel in half the opposite way with right sides together.
Stitch the side edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance.
And real quickly before we get into sewing, we're going to be using a serger for this project. These are super great for knit fabrics. They allow you to sew stretchy fabrics without breaking the thread. And another great thing, they also cut and clean up the edge as you're sewing. All in all, giving you a more professional look. But if you don't have a serger, that's totally fine. You can still use your regular domestic sewing machine. All you have to do is switch your machine to a zigzag stitch, adjust the height and width to your preference, and this is going to allow that thread to stretch with the fabric. Both of these methods work great. It's just something to keep in mind if you plan on selling these. I will say the serger does speed up production time. After finishing up the serge, double check both sides, make sure all the layers got stitched together. Using the pattern, locate the center fold guide. So simply fold it in half with the wrong sides together and the right sides facing out. Before we hem the top edge, we're going to actually move to the bottom edge, line up the sides on the bottom edge, and add a serge. And if you don't have a serger, just zigzag stitch directly on that edge. This step is optional, but it's really going to help in future steps because what we're doing is combining these layers and essentially making it one panel, which will prevent it from shifting around when you sew all the panels together at the end. Next, we're going to find the eyelets, and what we're going to do is add a hem below those eyelets, and this is going to create a path for our elastic cord to travel through. When it comes to actually making the stitch, there's a few different methods you can take, and I'm going to run you through those methods right now. Starting with the cover stitch machine, this is the machine that's used on mostly all knitwear products that you're going to buy in the store. It's a similar concept to the serger where the thread is going to stretch with the fabric so the thread doesn't snap. Most of these machines give you an option of 2 to 3 needles in a wide variety of stitch styles. And you use it the same way as a sewing machine. I ran it through directly on top of the seam so I have a stitch on both sides. You can do it this way or you can do it on one side of the seam. But as you can see, the back looks similar to a serge and it's going to have a nice cross stitch and it stretches without snapping the thread. To get it looking perfect, I do recommend using an edge presser foot and also matching your thread with the color of your fabric. The second option is using just a standard domestic sewing machine. I typically stick to just the straight stitch, but you can mix it up, add a twin needle, and get a similar effect as the cover stitch machine. The twin needle will give you 2 stitches and a zigzag back, so it will allow the thread to stretch with the fabric. And both of these techniques work great, so use whatever one that works best for you. You mainly want to make sure it's under those eyelets and as even as possible from the top edge all the way around. As you can see with this top stitch, you can stretch it really far and it's not going to break that thread. It's a really good technique to use and a machine you should look into if you plan on making a lot of these. Next, we'll be adding the elastic cord. I'll be using a standard elastic cord. You can pretty much pick this up at any hobby store. And the reason I'm using elastic is because I want this panel to cinch closed. Feed the end into your eyelet and just work it all the way around that top edge. This may take a little bit of time. You gotta move it around. You can use different techniques like a hanger or a safety pin. Once you have the end out the opposite eyelet, you can trim it down. And essentially, you only need enough to make it exactly the same width as that top edge. Cut 2 to 4 inches extra because we will be overlapping the ends and sewing them together. Before we sew the ends together, we're going to grab a double opening cord stopper. This will be the main component used to cinch this panel shut and hold it closed. Feed one end of the elastic through both openings of the cord stopper. Slide it down past the 2 to 4 inch mark, giving you enough room to overlap the ends and add a stitch. When it comes to making the stitch, I'm using a zigzag stitch so I can go back and forth on both sides of the elastic. I found this was the most efficient way to do it with this style of elastic. It creates a nice strong hold that's not going to rip apart. Feed the stitched end back into the eyelet and all the way back to the back side of the face panel. And that's going to complete the installation of the elastic. Go ahead, give it a try, cinch it closed. If you want to make any adjustments, you can pull the elastic back out, trim it down, or add a bigger piece. Go ahead and place this panel off to the side and grab your hood panels. And going along with the hood panel, you'll need the middle hood panel. What we're going to be doing is sewing the long edge of the middle hood panel to the back curved edge of the hood panel. Place one hood panel off to the side, make sure the right side is facing up. Lay out the middle hood panel on the back curved edge of the hood panel with right sides together. When you have both layers lined up, we're going to stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Feel free to use a serger or a zigzag stitch. After finishing up the stitch, double check both layers, make sure everything got stitched together, and we're going to do the same thing on the opposite side of the middle hood panel. So grab the opposite hood panel, line up the edge of the middle hood panel with the back curved edge of the hood panel. Make sure the right sides are together and stitch the back edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Again, use a serger or a zigzag stitch. And after finishing up the stitch, double check to make sure all the layers got stitched together. If everything is looking good, we're going to keep this pattern assembly out and call it our hood assembly, and move on to the next step of adding the eyelets. Just like in previous steps, we're going to place the pattern over the panel, locate the eyelet placement guide, cut out the eyelet placement guide, make sure the panel is perfectly aligned on the panel, and using chalk, mark out the eyelet placement guide. Repeat this process for the opposite hood panel. And you can make these marks on the wrong or right side of the fabric. Using a hole puncher scissors, create holes in your eyelet placement guides. I'll be using the same size eyelets as I did for the face panel. Going along with those eyelets, I'll be using the same plastic washers. Feed the eyelet through the hole, add your backing, and hammer it into position. And just like the eyelets on the face panel, the placement of the eyelets on the hood panel is very critical. You want them to be close enough to the outside edge so you can roll it over, but not too close. So if you are using a larger eyelet, just keep that in mind. Flip the hood assembly around to the opposite hood panel and add your second eyelet. I like to quickly compare them to make sure they're about in the same spot on both panels. If everything is looking good, we're going to lay the hood assembly out flat, lay the pattern over top, and locate the hem guide at the front edge. This is the point we're going to be rolling that edge over, and it's going to fold under the eyelet and hopefully past the eyelet. If for some reason you roll it over and it doesn't go past the eyelet, that's totally fine. You can just roll it over a little bit more so it goes past that eyelet. That's why I was saying the placement of the eyelet is very critical, because you want this rolled edge to go past the eyelet for it to work correctly. Try to make the hem as even as possible and place a few pins. And from here, we're going to add a top stitch directly on top of that raw edge on the underside. And that's a big reason why I'm using the cover stitch machine, because the underside of that stitch has the crisscross pattern, and it's going to help cover up that raw edge on the inside of the hood assembly. If you don't have a cover stitch, you can either use the twin needle technique or a zigzag stitch. And just like with the face panel, this is going to create a pathway for our cord to be fed through, and ultimately be used to cinch that hood closed for opening adjustments. But anyways, from here we can place this hood assembly off to the side and grab the shoulder panel. Essentially, we're going to be doing the same thing we did for the face panel. We're going to lay it out flat with right sides facing up. Fold the panel in half with right sides together and stitch the side edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. After finishing up the stitch, double check both sides, make sure all the layers got stitched together. If everything is looking good, we can flip the right side of the panel out, lay the pattern over top, and locate the hem guide at the bottom edge. And this is going to be the edge that has the large curved indent. So what we're going to do is roll that edge over a 1/2 inch, place pins all the way around, try to keep it as even as possible. And once you're ready and you have all your pins in it, we're going to add a cover stitch all the way around the outside edge, just like we did to the hood panel. Try to stitch directly on top of that raw edge from the top side. And after finishing up that stitch, open up the bottom, double check to make sure all the layers are even and looking good. And if it's not 100% even, that's totally fine. This is going to be resting on your shoulders, so it's not going to be that noticeable. And really quick with this panel before we move on, the height can still be easily adjusted by trimming that top edge, and you can bring it down if you're looking for a shoulder panel that's a little bit shorter and not going to bunch up so much on your shoulders. But anyways, we can place this panel off to the side, grab the hood panel assembly and the face panel. We're going to bring these two panels together by lining up the back edge on the face panel with the center of the middle hood panel. Place the wrong side of the hood assembly to the right side of the face panel. Lining up the back center for both panels, place a pin. And from here, we're going to wrap the bottom edge of the hood assembly around the bottom edge of the face panel. Do the same thing for both sides of the hood assembly. And I highly recommend placing pins so you can kind of get an idea on where both sides of the hood assembly are going to go on the bottom edge of that face panel. So depending on what style of fabric you use, you can add the shoulder panel on here as well. But before we do that, I'm actually going to stitch both of these layers together first, because this fabric is very thick and all 4 layers are not going to sew together good. So by adding this serge, it's actually going to shrink that fabric down a little bit and essentially unify these 3 layers into one. After finishing up the stitch, double check to make sure all the layers got stitched together. And you also want to quickly check to see if the eyelets on the face panel are in the center of the hood assembly. If everything is looking good, you can slide it to the side and grab your shoulder panel. And we'll be adding the shoulder panel to the hood assembly the exact same way by locating the back center on both the hood panel, face panel, and the shoulder panel. Flip the shoulder panel to the wrong side so the right side of the fabric is touching the right side of the hood assembly. And essentially just slide it over top of the hood assembly, lining up the centers on all of the backs. Once we got all the layers lined up, typically we would just stitch them all together, but essentially this fabric is way too thick for my serger to handle. If you're using an industrial serger, you should have no problem. You can go ahead and just make your stitch. But I'm going to show you a way around this and also keeping nice clean edges on the inside. So before we add the shoulder panel on, we're going to clean up that top raw edge with the serger. And if you don't have a serger, you can use a zigzag stitch. And all we're doing is turning that raw edge into a nice serged edge, so that when you look into the inside of the finished product, you're going to see a serged edge and it's going to look more professional. And depending on what fabric you're using, it's going to prevent fraying. After the serge, back it up to the steps we just did. Add the shoulder panel onto the hood assembly, lining up the back center seams. The shoulder panel will wrap around the hood assembly on the outside with the right sides together. Move both panels around to get everything aligned and stitch that bottom edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Since the fabric I'm using is a little bit thicker, I'm just going to use a standard straight stitch, but if you're using very stretchy fabric, I highly recommend using a zigzag stitch to help prevent that thread from snapping if it's stretched too far. With the stitch complete, double check to make sure all the layers got stitched together, and from here we can pull the right sides out. Double check to make sure that the eyelets are centered, the face panel is centered, everything is looking good. Feel free to try it on, and if everything is up to par, we're going to move on to the next step, and that's adding cord to the hood eyelets. I'll be using paracord. I like using paracord. It comes in a bunch of different styles and it's really strong. To install the cord, I'll be using the safety pin technique. I found this was the best way to install a floppy cord like this. And it's really simple. Just clip that safety pin to the end of the cord and feed that safety pin into the eyelet. And the whole reason for doing this is that you can feel that safety pin and kind of maneuver it along that pathway. Another really good technique is using a metal hanger or just a small metal rod, but I don't have any sitting around at the moment, so I decided to use the safety pin technique. Feel free to comment any good techniques below. Pull the end of the cord out the eyelet as far as you want and trim it up. This is really based on preference and how far you want these drawstrings to fall. I'm going to burn the ends to prevent fraying. And this is another reason I use paracord, because you can melt these ends and clean them up nicely. With both of the ends cleaned up, we're going to grab our cord stoppers. I'm going to be using 2 separate cord stoppers. If you want to feed these into one cord stopper like we did the elastic cord, feel free to do so. Feed the ends of the cord through the cord stopper openings and add a knot. And the knot is going to prevent the cord stopper from sliding off. And again, you can adjust these to any length you want. If you want them shorter or longer, you can do that by adding more or less cord. Moving on to the final section, and that's adding branding and detail. I decided to add beads onto the cord. It's a fun little detail to add. You can get all different types of beads and it looks pretty cool. I also added a tab and a little holder to the elastic cord area. This is going to help pull the tab and then you can slide it in there so it's not flapping around. And the type of branding I'm using is just branded leather added with double-sided rivets. This is a really basic technique and it's easy to do. And before we wrap it up, I want to quickly go over the sizing. It's very easy to adjust this pattern to your custom measurements by using the steps in the beginning. And all you have to do is adjust one section at a time and kind of taper it into your sizings if you want to bring it down in size, or taper it up if you want to make it even bigger. The big thing to keep in mind is to make sure you're matching the circumference if you're making adjustments. And there you have it, your over-the-helmet balaclava is complete. Hopefully yours turned out good and these steps really help bring yours to that professional level. And I always like to see what you come up with, so tag me on Instagram at Properfit Clothing. And if you ever have anything you want to see, definitely send it my way and I'll see what I can do. But until then, I'm going to keep the videos coming at you, so I'll see you next time.